The morning was dry and humming with bees, the kind of morning that tricks your bones into thinking maybe the day won't hurt so much, until you try to stand. 81 years old, and every joint in my body now sent weather forecasts. I, Leonard Wexley, had long since made peace with the slow collapse of time. My house, a creaking old place in St. Thomas Parish with ivy choking the porch rails and a roof patched more times than I can remember, sat at the edge of a garden I no longer had the strength to prune properly. That was where Marco came in. Marco started as a part-time gardener nearly 12 years ago, back when Ruth was still alive and insisted we keep the roses. Now the roses are gone and so is Ruth, and yet Marco stayed. Not just working the grounds, but helping me haul firewood, bringing fresh bread from the bakery down in Ashford, even fixing the radio last winter when it died in the middle of Marla's 5th. That Tuesday morning, I was stirring powdered creamer into instant coffee with a hand that didn't stop shaking. The kitchen smelled faintly of liniment and burnt toast. The old transistor radio was muttering about school closures and a new tax bill, but I barely listened. It wasn't until I heard the gravel shift under tires out front that my head turned. A sleek black Lexus came to a slow stop, a car too new and too clean for a place like this. I didn't even have to see the license plate. It was my son, Adam. He didn't call ahead, didn't send a message or an email, just arrived, like a bank notice pinned to your front door. The passenger door opened first. His wife, Jennifer, stepped out wearing sunglasses despite the clouds. Then Adam, tall and stiff, the way he's always been since he made senior partner. I watched him adjust his sleeves like he was preparing to sue the front yard. "Dad," he said as he approached, stopping short of the porch steps. "Thought we'd drop by." "Drop by," I repeated slowly, placing my mug on the windowsill. "That why you're here with folders in your hand?" His smile tightened like a belt, one notch too far. "Nothing serious, just some paperwork. Figured I'd go over a few things. Health proxies, the usual." Behind him, Jennifer was already texting. She didn't look up, not even when the screen door creaked open behind me. Marco stepped out carrying the compost bucket, paused when he saw the car, then nodded respectfully toward Adam. "Morning." Adam blinked. "You still have help?" "I do," I said, "and good help too." Marco disappeared around the side of the house without another word. Adam stepped up to the porch finally, but didn't sit. He glanced inside like he expected something to jump out at him. "Dad, it's just, look, we've been thinking. With your condition." "My condition? You forget things. You fell last winter." I slipped on a step. It was icy. "Jennifer and we just think it's time to talk about planning ahead. Maybe sell the house, move closer to us. Assisted living. You'd have your own suite. Weekly yoga. It's safe." I stared at him. He kept talking. "We've already looked into some excellent options, and about the will, just to be practical." "Practical," I said quietly. He nodded. "Just revisiting some of the terms with the property and, well, Marco, I saw you've included him." I looked at Adam like I was seeing him for the first time again. The boy who used to beg me to carry him on my shoulders. The teenager who once sobbed into my coat when Ruth had her first cancer scare. Now here he was, standing on the porch of a house he hadn't visited in nearly 2 years, telling me I was too old to make decisions about my own life. I didn't say anything more, not then, not to him. Instead, I turned, went inside, and shut the door behind me. I heard his voice faintly through the wood. "He's being unreasonable," he told Jennifer. Yes, I thought, and finally, gloriously, I was. The kettle had long since gone cold, and my coffee sat untouched on the windowsill, a thin skin forming across the top like the surface of a pond about to freeze. I stayed by the door for a long while after Adam left, watching nothing in particular. There was a time when a visit from my son would have brought joy. A surprise like that would have meant lunch on the back porch, conversation, maybe a slow walk around the garden. But now his visits came with documents and timelines and decisions already made. Marco came back around the corner, wiping his hands on a towel tucked into his belt. He didn't ask questions. He never did. That was one of the things I respected most about him. He knew when silence was more generous than words. "Everything all right, Mr. Wexley?" he asked, glancing toward the driveway where the Lexus had just pulled out. "Same old," I muttered. Adam came to do some pruning of his own. Marco smirked faintly, but didn't press. He went back to the shed and I went back to my kitchen. Later that evening, the phone rang. Landline. Adam again. "Dad," he said, "I know you're upset, but we need to be realistic." "Do we?" I asked. "You're 81, you live alone, the house is old, one fall and what?" I asked. "I'll be dead and you can finally flip it for a nice profit." "Dad, come on." "Then what is it, Adam? Because it's not about me. You didn't ask how I was. You didn't ask if I'm happy. You just brought papers. You came here like a lawyer, not a son." There was a pause on the line, the kind where people are choosing between the truth and something that sounds more polite. "We're just trying to help," he said finally. "You're not thinking clearly anymore. You've been too generous with Marco. Jennifer and I, well, we just think it's time you had some guidance." "Guidance," I echoed. The word stayed with me long after the call ended. It echoed in the corners of my quiet house, trailed me into the bathroom as I brushed my teeth, and haunted the doorway of my bedroom like a ghost. Guidance. As if my thoughts were some untrained thing in need of correction. As if I hadn't lived a life long enough to know what mattered and what didn't. It was the first time I truly felt the shift, not just in Adam's voice, but in how he saw me. Not as a father, not as a man who built this house and paid for his college and nursed Ruth through the worst of her days. No, he saw a signature, a risk, a loose end. A few days passed and then came the letter. Not an email, not a voicemail, a real letter, delivered in a sleek envelope with his firm's logo embossed in gold. Inside, more documents, more recommendations. A glossy brochure for a retirement community in Westfield with bullet points about social events, 24-hour care, and aging with dignity. I sat at the table flipping through it, page by page, each one more cheerful and condescending than the last. Photos of smiling grey-haired couples playing bridge, dancing in exercise classes, sipping wine. I had to laugh. None of those people looked like they'd ever touched dirt in their lives, and not one of them looked like Ruth. Attached to the brochure was a letter in Adam's tight, efficient handwriting. "Dad, we love you. We just want to be sure you're cared for. This place is state-of-the-art. I've booked you a tour for next month. They'll call to confirm." Also attached is an updated version of the will we discussed. Just some streamlining, nothing major. "Love, Adam, the will we discussed." But we hadn't discussed anything. He had spoken, I had listened. Streamlining, he called it. I skimmed the pages. In this version, the garden was to be sold. The house divided and liquidated. No mention of Marco, of course, just percentages and names. Adam, Jennifer, the children. I placed the letter back in the envelope and set it in the drawer by the sink. Not the trash. Not yet. I'm too old for tantrums, but not too old to notice when a knife is being slipped between the ribs. The next time Marco came inside to fix the front latch, I asked him if he could stay for tea. He blinked, surprised, then smiled and nodded. We sat in the sunroom. The light was slanted and golden, falling across the carpet like a memory. I poured us both mugs of Earl Grey and handed him a plate of digestives Ruth used to buy in bulk. "You've been with us, me, for 12 years now," I said. "Almost 13, he said, politely correcting me. "August will make 13. "You ever think about leaving?" I asked. He sipped his tea. "Not really. I like it here." "What if I told you Adam wants to sell the place?" His expression didn't change much. He'd learned how to keep his face still over the years. The kind of stillness you earn from being talked over by too many people with too much money. "Wouldn't be my place to say anything," he said quietly. "No, I suppose it wouldn't," I said. "But I'm saying something now. Adam thinks I'm too old to know what's best. He wants to give me guidance. Can you believe that?" Marco smiled faintly. "I've seen you walk this property every morning, even when your cane sinks into the mud," I chuckled. "Foolish old man." "No," he said. "A man who still knows where he's going." We sat in silence after that, not an awkward silence, just the kind that lets two people breathe in the same rhythm for a while. Later that evening, I brought out the old will, the real one, the one Ruth and I had drafted after her diagnosis. We'd meant for it to honor the things we both loved most. This home, the land it sat on, and the people who stood by us without asking for anything. I looked at Marco's name, written in my own shaky script, and felt something solid in my chest for the first time in days. Adam may have brought the first disrespect, but the final decision? That would be mine. The envelope this time was larger, thicker. It came by courier, hand-delivered to the front door by a young man in a crisp black jacket who looked confused when I answered with a trowel in one hand and dirt on my knees. "Delivery for Mr. Leonard Wexley," he said, blinking at the state of me. "You found him," I replied, setting the trowel down beside the rosemary bush I'd been transplanting. He handed over the package with both hands like it contained something sacred. I watched him drive off in a little black car, tires crunching over gravel that Ruth and I had laid together 30 years ago. Inside, I washed my hands and sat down at the kitchen table, that same corner seat I'd used since the 80s. The envelope was embossed again. This time, Wexley and Drummond, estate law, Adam's name in the corner. I didn't even need to open it. I already knew the scent of strategy. But I did open it. Old habits die hard. Inside was a cover letter, sterile and polite, from a partner at the firm, not Adam. It was addressed to Mr. Leonard Wexley in a tone that sounded friendly enough, but was crafted with the finesse of a scalpel. It opened with, "We write to you regarding recent discussions within the family about the appropriate management of your estate, as well as your ongoing healthcare and housing needs." I stopped reading for a moment. Healthcare and housing needs. Like I was a spreadsheet. There were attachments, proposed revisions to my will, a draft document outlining power of attorney, naming Adam, of course, as the primary decision-maker should I become incapacitated or otherwise unfit. Attached was also a glossy folder with smiling doctors and tidy little blurbs about elder care solutions. I stood up, walked to the sink, and stared out at the garden. Marco was down by the back wall, pruning the hedges, working like always, without fanfare, without complaint. That man had pulled me from the ground when I fell last winter. He carried me to the porch, patched up my elbow, and stayed the night in his truck just in case I needed help. Not because I asked, because he saw. I looked down again at the line that changed everything. To ensure that your financial decisions are guided with clarity and responsibility, we recommend a full legal transfer of authority to your son, Adam Wexley. Guided with clarity. They couldn't have said control. Too blunt. No, this was dressed up, made to look like kindness, like help. But it was a collar, a leash. It told me everything I needed to know about how Adam saw me now. Not a father, not a man, just a liability with a signature. That evening, I didn't call Adam. I didn't write. Instead, I called my own lawyer. Old Mrs. Thompson down on Harbury Lane, the same woman who did our mortgage papers in '83. Her voice cracked from age, but not from weakness. "Leonard," she said, after I explained, "they're circling. They think they smell the end." "Well," I said, "they're going to be disappointed, because I haven't died yet and I still know a hawk from a handsaw. Do you want to schedule a meeting?" "Yes, and bring my original will. We're making a few things more permanent." I hung up and sat in the quiet. Then, almost without thinking, I poured 2 cups of tea, one for me, one for Ruth. I still do that sometimes. The second cup sits untouched, but it makes me feel less alone. Adam called that weekend. "Did you get the paperwork?" "I got it, and I'm not signing anything." He was silent on the other end. "Dad," he said carefully, "I understand that this is difficult, but we have to face facts. We're not trying to take anything, we're trying to protect it. And you think Marco's going to do that? He's a gardener." "He's a man," I said, "who's never lied to me, who's never tried to manipulate me into signing my life away." Adam's voice sharpened. "You're being irrational." "I'm being clear, which is more than I can say for you. You're letting emotion cloud good judgment. I'm your son, Dad." I took a deep breath, stared out at the bay where the sunlight had started to flicker on the waves like fire. "You stopped being a son," I said, "the moment you decided you knew better than I did what my life should look like." He hung up. For days there was no word, no email, no envelope. It was like a storm had passed, but I knew better. Storms wait, they gather, they always come back. Marco found me by the rose arbor 3 days later, sitting on a bench that had gone green with age. I'd been staring at the place where Ruth used to plant lavender. "Something wrong, Mr. Wexley?" he asked. "Just thinking." He sat beside me, careful not to let the bench creak too loud. "You ever been treated like you're no longer real?" I asked. He looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "Like people talk about you in the past tense while you're still breathing. They make plans around you, speak for you, assume you've gone soft because you walk slower now. He nodded slowly. Sometimes people look at me like I'm just the help, like I don't think, don't feel. Adam thinks I'm a project, I said. A problem to be solved. I was never a problem, Marco. Not until I got old. You're not a problem, sir, he said. We sat for a long time. Bees came and went. The light moved across the grass. I realized then that I didn't feel angry anymore, just awake. Later that week, I signed the documents Mrs. Thompson prepared, updated the will, clarified the trust, added Marco's name more prominently now. Not because I owed him, but because he earned it, with loyalty, with presence, with kindness that never once asked to be rewarded. Adam had sent a legal push. I had pushed back with something far more permanent. The sun was low over the garden that evening, casting long amber shadows across the stone path Ruth had once laid by hand. I sat on the back porch with a blanket across my legs, a glass of rye untouched beside me. Marco had finished for the day, but the scent of grass clippings and rosemary still hung thick in the air. It reminded me of something long ago, before all this, before lawyers and envelopes and cold, strained conversations with a man who used to call me Daddy. I looked out at the hydrangeas near the fence line, Ruth's favorite. She used to call them the blue fire, said they looked like they held thunderclouds inside their petals. The memory came suddenly, like a breath I'd been holding for years. She was kneeling in the dirt, gloves up to her elbows, smiling through a smear of mud across her cheek. Young, flushed from the sun, humming that old Billy Joel tune she played every time we danced in the kitchen. I was holding a watering can, pretending to help, but mostly just watching her work. "You're not much of a gardener, Len," she laughed. "I married one," I said, and that was enough. Those were the years when Adam was still little, before the city pulled him away, back when he ran barefoot across this yard, chasing fireflies and calling Marco Mr. Moman, back when he used to fall asleep on the couch with grass stains on his knees and dirt under his nails. He was a good boy once, not cruel, just curious, sharp, always asking questions, wanting to know how things worked. I remember the day he asked me how people die. He couldn't have been more than 6. We were fishing by the pier. Ruth had packed sandwiches and juice boxes, and Adam had caught a trout no bigger than his hand. "Why does everything stop, Daddy?" he asked, looking at the fish as it flopped and stilled. I didn't have an answer. Not one that would make sense to a boy who still believed I could fix anything. "Things stop to make room for new things," I said. "It's how the world keeps moving." Adam stared at the water for a long time after that, but the years rolled forward like they always do. By high school, he was more interested in books than bugs, more drawn to law than laughter. He started correcting Ruth's grammar, started asking why I still drove an old truck and why we didn't upgrade the kitchen like the neighbors did. He stopped helping in the garden, said it was beneath him. Marco took over more of the chores. Adam started coming home with crisp button-downs and a voice that sounded like it was rehearsed. When Ruth got sick, he was already working in the city. He called often at first, then less. The treatment took everything out of her. Her hair, her energy, even her laughter. But not her grace, never that. One night, near the end, she sat up in bed and asked me, "Do you think he resents us?" "Who, Adam?" "He wanted more than this place, more than we gave." I took her hand. "We gave him love. He just doesn't recognize the shape of it anymore." The morning she passed, Marco was the one who made the calls, who cleaned up the bedroom, who sat beside me and didn't say a word for hours. Adam arrived the next afternoon, full of apologies and noise. He cried, yes. He held me. But there was something already elsewhere in his eyes, like he'd moved ahead without us. After the funeral, he suggested we sell the house. "Too many memories," he said. "That's the point," I replied. We didn't talk for months after that. The sun slipped lower now behind the trees, and the shadows grew colder. I pulled the blanket tighter around my knees. The glass of rye still sat untouched, catching the fading light like a lens into the past. I remembered Adam at 17, storming out the front door after a fight about curfew. I remembered him at 24, standing in the courtroom in his first real trial, sharp suit, steady voice. I had never been prouder. I told him so. He shrugged and said, "I guess I got the argumentative gene from you." But that wasn't what he got from me. He got this land, this life, the steadiness, the sense that a home was a place you tended, not just lived in. He just didn't want it. Marco understood that more than Adam ever had. He didn't just mow the lawn or trim the hedges. He remembered when Ruth's roses bloomed, remembered the squirrel that used to steal strawberries from the back bed, remembered the name of every pet we buried beneath the apple tree. He once found an old drawing of Adam's tucked under a floorboard, crayon and paper soft with age, and brought it to me like it was treasure. And it was. That's the thing no one tells you about getting old. It's not the body that betrays you first. It's the feeling that the world is slowly forgetting the shape of who you were, that your stories are rotting in drawers, that your name will outlive your voice. But not if you give it away with care. I thought of Ruth again, her voice, her touch, her laugh. And then I thought of Adam's voice on the phone, cold and confident, telling me he would handle things. He didn't realize I had already handled them. The flashback stopped then, not because they were done, but because the crickets began chirping louder in the grass. Evening had finally swallowed the garden. I stood slowly, joints crackling like gravel under tires, and went back inside. On the table was the updated will, notarized, signed, sealed. It bore no apology, no revenge, just a quiet decision. I passed it every day now on my way to the kitchen, and each time I did, I thought of a phrase Ruth once told me as we laid down mulch in the spring. What you plant with love grows in peace. Adam planted control. I planted something else entirely. It was the morning after a heavy rain, and the world outside looked like it had been scrubbed clean overnight. The air was thick with petrichor, that rich, earthy scent that reminded me of childhood walks in the woods with my father, back before the war, before marriage, before time taught me how to be still. I opened the back door and stepped onto the slick porch, cane in one hand, coffee in the other. My knees were unforgiving, but something about the quiet after a storm made the pain seem gentler, more bearable. Marco was already out in the garden, he always was. I watched him from the top step, his boots deep in the soaked soil as he straightened a trellis that the wind had knocked sideways. No gloves, just bare, calloused hands gripping the wet wood, eyes steady. He never rushed. He never muttered complaints under his breath. He just moved with a kind of patience most men had forgotten. I didn't call out. He must have sensed me, though, because a moment later he looked up and offered a small wave, the kind you give someone you see every day but still respect. That wind was no joke, he called, wiping his brow. Nearly took the chimney off, I replied. Rattled the windows like it had something to say. He chuckled and turned back to the task, anchoring the base of the trellis with quiet focus. I stood there a while longer, coffee cooling in my mug, muttered before I finally sat down with a sigh. The storm hadn't just shaken the trees. It had shaken something in me too. Memories, old regrets, the kind of thoughts that collect in the corners when you're alone for too long. By midday, Marco had finished retying the climbing roses and clearing the broken branches that had fallen along the southern fence. I watched him come up the path toward the porch with mud on his jeans and a small cardboard box in his arms. Found this in the shed, he said, holding it out to me. Must have been pushed behind the shelves during the clean-out last spring. I set down my cane and took it carefully, the damp cardboard soft at the edges. Inside were photographs, old, faded, curled at the corners. Ruth and me in the early days, our wedding, Adam in a sandbox wearing a crooked hat, even a few Polaroids of the garden when the magnolias had first bloomed. I hadn't seen these in years. Thought they might mean something, Marco said quietly. I looked up at him and nodded. They mean everything. He stood there uncertain, always humble, as if he thought he might have overstepped. But all he had done was remind me that some people still noticed, still cared, not out of duty or bloodline, but out of something far rarer, decency. Marco, I said, do you ever think about leaving? His brow furrowed. Leaving? This job, this place, it can't be what you dreamed of as a boy. He shifted on his feet, looking out over the garden, the house, the old oak tree that shaded the swing Adam used to climb on. My dreams weren't big, he said, not like most people's. I wanted peace, a place where the work mattered, where someone might say thank you now and then. I've had worse. You've had better? I asked. He smiled faintly. Not often. I invited him in for lunch. Nothing fancy, just soup from a can, a few slices of buttered bread, and apples I'd cut myself with shaking hands. He ate slowly, respectfully, like it was a feast. Didn't take a second bite until I had taken my first. "You know," I said, "Adam used to sit right where you're sitting now. Same look in his eyes when he was a boy. Curious, kind. He helped Ruth with the herbs once, planted a basil sprout and checked on it every day for a month. You'd think it was a puppy, the way he fussed over it." "What happened?" Marco asked gently. I sighed, staring into my soup. Life, ambition, maybe too much of me in him, maybe too little. Somewhere along the line, he started measuring worth in terms of outcomes, money, power, control. He doesn't see me anymore, just the estate, the assets, the liability. "I'm sorry," Marco said. "Don't be. I'm not telling you for sympathy. I'm telling you because someone should know. Not everything that matters is written down in a will or signed in blue ink. Some things are handed down quietly, by choice, by trust." He didn't respond right away. He just took another sip of water, nodded once, and held my gaze for a moment longer than most people do. After he left that afternoon, I found myself staring at the box of photos again, pulled them out one by one, let the past spill onto the table like old coins. I held Ruth's face in my hand and remembered the way she used to look at me when she was angry. Eyes sharp, chin tilted, but love still there, always. I thought about how she would have handled all of this, the visits, the disrespect, the lawyered-up son, and then I heard her voice. Not aloud, but inside me. "What you leave behind is more than just land and money, Len. It's who you trusted with your story." I stood up, went to the drawer where the legal documents were kept, pulled them out and spread them across the table. I didn't need to read them again. I already knew what I'd written. But I added something that day. A letter, longhand. Folded it neatly and slid it into the envelope with the will. Sealed it with wax like Ruth used to when she sent Christmas cards. The letter wasn't long, just a few words, but they were true. "To Marco, not because you asked, not because you expected, because you stayed." That night, the rain returned, gentle this time. It tapped at the windows like an old friend, and I fell asleep in my chair with the box of photos on my lap and peace, for once, curled beside me like a cat. The call came just after 7 on a Saturday morning. I was in the living room, trying to coax the pilot light back to life in the old fireplace, when the landline rang loud enough to make me jump. I stood slowly, knees stiff, back sore, and answered without looking at the caller ID. "Hello? Dad." Adam's voice. Clipped, impatient. The kind of tone people use when they've already decided how the conversation will end. "You're up early," I said, walking back toward the window to watch the tide roll in. "I got a call from Marco." That gave me pause. "You did? He said you collapsed in the garden yesterday." I sighed. "I didn't collapse. I sat down too fast after pulling a root and felt lightheaded. He helped me up, that's all." "Dad," he said, and I could hear the edge in his voice now, "you need help. Proper care, supervision. What if Marco wasn't there?" "But he was," I said. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're gambling with your health just to prove a point. This isn't about independence anymore. It's about pride, stubborn, dangerous pride." I stared out at the hydrangeas, thinking of Ruth, of how she used to say Adam was born with a gavel in his hand. "You weren't here," I said calmly. "He was. He helped me. No fuss, no judgment, just kindness." "He's manipulating you." I blinked. "Say that again?" "Marco's got his eyes on the estate, on everything. You're vulnerable, and he's taking advantage." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "The man who fixes my gutters and brings me warm bread on Sundays is the threat, not the son who shows up with contracts and pre-approved power of attorney forms." Adam didn't respond right away. I imagined him pacing in his kitchen, wireless earbuds in, sipping from a stainless steel mug with his name etched into the side. "I'm coming over," he said. "This has gone far enough." I didn't argue. I didn't have the strength. Instead, I hung up the phone and stood there for a while, letting the silence settle around me like dust. He arrived 3 hours later. No knock, no greeting. Just the sound of tires grinding into gravel and the slam of a car door. I was on the porch in my chair when he came stomping up the steps, coat unbuttoned, folder in hand. "Dad," he said without a trace of warmth. "Morning. We're doing this now. I brought the documents again, new version. We've removed some of the ambiguous portions. I raised an eyebrow. Ambiguous. Marco's name has been struck. Of course it has. He opened the folder and laid out the papers on the porch table like a magician about to perform a trick. The pages were tabbed with yellow stickers, each labelled "Sign Here," the kind of efficiency only found in offices that didn't smell like earth or books or memory. "You want to explain to me what this is?" I asked. "It's clarity," he said. "It's protection, for you, for us. You've made some irrational choices, Dad. This gardener, he's not family." "He's more than that," I said evenly. "No, he's not." Adam's voice dropped, sharp and cold. "You're handing your life's work to a man who trims hedges. Do you know how ridiculous that sounds?" I leaned forward, slow but deliberate. My hands shook slightly, but my voice did not. "No, Adam, I'm handing it to a man who sits with me when I'm in pain, who listens when I talk, who doesn't treat me like a walking lawsuit, who still sees me as me." He rolled his eyes and stepped back. "You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said, my voice rising now, steadier than it had been in weeks. "I may walk slower, I may forget where I put my keys, but I haven't forgotten who you've become." He froze. I continued. "You come here with folders and forms and talk about legacy like it's a transaction. You say it's about safety, but it's about control. And here's the part you really won't like, son. I don't owe you anything." Adam looked stunned, like a slap had landed without warning. But I wasn't finished. "You abandoned this place a long time ago. When your mother got sick, you called but never came. When she died, you cried at the funeral and then tried to sell the house 2 days later. The only time I see you is when you think something needs signing." His mouth opened, then closed again. "You want the land, the house, the inheritance. Fine. Take a picture, because that's all you'll ever get from it." He stood there a long while, folder still in his hand, chest rising and falling with slow, angry breaths. "You're making a mistake," he said finally. "Maybe," I replied, "but it's mine to make." He left without another word. As his car disappeared down the hill, I sat back in my chair and exhaled so deeply my ribs ached. For a moment, the world was still. The trees swayed softly. A finch hopped across the porch rail. Then the door opened behind me. Marco, he didn't ask what had happened. He didn't need to. Instead, he handed me a folded towel with 2 slices of banana bread wrapped inside. "Thought you might want something warm," he said. I nodded, took the bread, and let the silence between us do what words never could. That was the final straw. Not just Adam's arrogance, not just his dismissiveness, but the way he had said he's not family. Like blood was the only currency of loyalty. Like love could be weighed and measured and erased with a pen. He'd drawn a line, and I'd stepped over it. Into a future he couldn't touch. Into a legacy he couldn't rewrite. It was a Thursday morning when I called Mrs. Thompson again. Her voice crackled over the line like an old record, but the steel beneath it had never dulled. "Ready to finalize it, Leonard?" she asked. "I am. No more changes?" "Just one," I said. "I want to make sure he can't contest it." "He'll try," she said, not unkindly. "They always do when they realize love wasn't enough to inherit the house." I laughed, a short, tired thing. He had more than enough love. He just wanted the title deed too. She offered me a time. Friday morning, 10 sharp, said she'd bring her assistant to witness the signing. Said we could do it in the garden if the weather held. "Bring your pen, Leonard," she added. "The one that doesn't shake." So I did. The night before, I couldn't sleep. Not from regret, I'd run out of that years ago, but from the weight of what it meant to choose something that final. It's a strange feeling, rewriting your will. It's not just about who gets what. It's about who deserves to carry on the parts of you that don't fit in a box. Your routines, your land, your silence, your ghosts. I walked the property in the dark, cane in hand, stars above me like a scattered inheritance no one could take. The rosemary bushes rustled softly in the breeze. The oak tree creaked like it was remembering. I ran a hand along the porch rail Ruth had painted blue, and I knew, deep in the hollow of my chest, that this was right. That morning, Marco helped set up a folding table out near the rose arbor. He brushed off the chairs, laid out a clean linen cloth, and stood back like he was arranging something sacred. Mrs. Thompson arrived precisely on time, her assistant in tow. She wore a beige trench coat and carried a battered briefcase that looked older than Adam. Her shoes sank a little in the garden path, but she never lost her balance. "You sure about this?" she asked as she sat across from me. "Sure as I've been about anything." She opened the folder. Thick stack. Pages full of small type and initials. My name printed in bold at the top of the first sheet. "This version supersedes all previous ones," she said. "You've named Marco as your primary beneficiary. The house, the land, the accounts tied to the property. You've allocated a small inheritance to Adam, enough to say you didn't forget him. But the bulk goes to the man who stood by you." I nodded, because I remember who held the door open when I couldn't. We began to sign. One page at a time, slowly, carefully, each pen stroke like a nail in a coffin that no longer scared me. When it was done, Mrs. Thompson snapped her briefcase shut with a satisfied click. "Ironclad," she said. "Competency certified, dated, witnessed. If he challenges it, he'll lose." Marco hadn't spoken a word the entire time. He stood behind me, hands folded, posture respectful. I turned to him. "Sit down, Marco." He hesitated. "Sir, I've told you not to call me that." He sat slowly, eyes uncertain. He looked at the signed documents on the table like they might catch fire. "You knew I was making changes," I said, "but you didn't know they'd be this." He shook his head. "No, Mr. Leonard, I didn't. I still don't understand why." "Because you stayed," I said simply. "You came when I called, and when I didn't. You saw me when others stopped looking. I've watched you sweep leaves like they were pages of a holy book. This place matters to you." Ruth would have liked that. His eyes flicked down. "She used to bring me lemonade when I worked summers. Said it wasn't right to be out there with no shade." "Sounds like her." "This is too much," he said finally. "I'm just the gardener." "Not anymore," I said. Mrs. Thompson slid the copies into envelopes and handed them to me. "Keep one here, one with me, one with your doctor, and maybe give a copy to him." I looked at Marco. "Do you want it?" He hesitated, then nodded. Took it with both hands. Held it like a library book he was afraid of damaging. They left shortly after, Mrs. Thompson tipping her hat as she walked down the path. Her assistant waved goodbye and ducked into the car without a word. The garden felt different after they were gone. Quieter, heavier, like it was holding its breath. Marco didn't say much that afternoon. He worked like always, tending the edges of the stone path, fixing the latch on the shed door, tightening the faucet behind the greenhouse. I watched him from the porch, the folder still on the table beside me. Later, as the sun dipped low, he came back up the steps, stood awkwardly by the railing. "I don't know what to say," he said. "Then don't." He looked at me. I didn't do any of this expecting that. "Good," I said. Because I didn't do it expecting thanks. He stepped back, nodded once, then paused. "Do you want me to stay later tonight? In case you need anything?" I smiled. "That'd be nice." After he left to get his things from the truck, I leaned back in my chair, the folder heavy in my lap. The will was changed, but what mattered most wasn't written on the page. It was in the way he looked at the house, in the way he spoke of Ruth like she was still on the porch offering lemonade, in the way I felt, finally seen again, not as a burden, not as a relic, but as a man. And if Adam ever came back to ask why, I'd hand him a copy of that will and say, because legacy is not a birthright, it's something you earn. The confrontation didn't come with a knock. It came with the slam of a car door and the sound of hurried footsteps on the gravel path, sharp and uneven, like someone walking with anger in their shoes. I was in the sunroom, watering Ruth's old spider plant, when I saw Adam storming across the lawn through the wide window panes, tie askew, blazer clutched under his arm, jaw clenched like he was grinding every word he intended to say before he said it. My hands paused mid-air, the watering can still half full. I didn't move. He didn't look around, didn't greet the house or the garden or the sky, just made a straight line to the porch and threw open the door without so much as a hello. "You changed the will," he said, not a question, a charge. I set the can down carefully. I did. "To him?" I didn't answer right away. I walked past him slowly, settled into my chair by the window. The room smelled like rosemary and dust, like old books and lived-in years. As Adam followed, folder in hand. It wasn't the same one from before. This one had my lawyer's watermark stamped in the corner. "I had a colleague look over it," he said, voice rising. "It's all legally binding, airtight." "Good," I said, folding my hands in my lap. He stared at me for a long moment, confused by the calm. Why? He asked finally. Why would you do this to me? I looked up. To you? He threw the folder onto the coffee table. I'm your son. Yes, I said evenly. You are. But you've spent more time managing my decline than sharing my life, he scoffed. This is ridiculous. You're giving everything to the gardener? Dad, do you even hear yourself? I hear myself just fine. I also hear you, loud and clear, every visit you've made, every phone call, every sentence wrapped in concern but loaded with control. You're twisting this, he said, pacing now. We just wanted what was best for you. You wanted what was easiest for you, I said. A neat solution, a clean signature, a quiet handoff of my autonomy so you wouldn't have to deal with me becoming inconvenient. He stopped. That's not fair. Neither is being treated like a piece of property. His mouth opened, then shut again. His fists clenched at his sides. He looked like a man who had rehearsed an argument, only to find the other actor reading from a different script. You think he cares about you? He said finally, grasping at something. He's taking advantage. You've known him for years, sure, but he's not family. And what does that mean to you, Adam? I asked. Because if family is supposed to love, to show up, to ask without demanding, then Marco has been more family to me than you've been in a decade. That landed hard. His face went red. You don't get to say that. I get to say anything I want in my own home. He turned, walked to the window, stared out at the garden. Mom would have never agreed to this. I felt my chest tighten, not from anger, but from grief. Don't you dare invoke your mother, I said, voice low and sharp. She would have seen what I see. She would have looked at Marco and said, that's a good man. She used to bring him lemonade in the summer. She liked him. She trusted him. Adam's shoulders sagged for just a second, then straightened again. This is about punishing me. No, I said, it's about rewarding him. He shook his head. You're not thinking clearly. I leaned forward. Don't mistake my age for confusion, son. I've had more clarity in the past month than I've had in years. This house, the land, the stories, the love that built it, it should go to someone who remembers it all. Not someone who shows up twice a year with forms in his hand and his engine still running. So that's it? He asked, voice cracking now, a flicker of real pain in his eyes. You're cutting me out. No, I said gently. I left you something. Enough to honor our name, enough to say you were here, but not enough to let you erase what matters. He turned back to the coffee table, stared at the folder like it might vanish if he looked hard enough. You chose him over me. I didn't respond right away. I stood slowly, walked over and picked up the folder, placed it back in his hands. I chose what was true, I said. That's not about sides, it's about peace. He looked at me then, really looked, like he was searching for some part of the father he remembered from childhood. Maybe the one who read him stories about trains and tucked him in after bad dreams. But that man had changed, not from bitterness, but from time and truth. You're really not going to change it back, he whispered. No, I said. He nodded slowly, turned toward the door. I guess that's all there is to say. You're welcome to stay for dinner, I offered. We're making shepherd's pie. Marco's bringing fresh rolls. He paused at the door, hand on the knob. No, he said. I've got things to do. I nodded. You always do. And then he was gone. I stood there a long while, watching the dust settle where he'd stood. Outside, the late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the floor. Marco came in a few minutes later, apron on, flour on his hands. Everything all right? He asked, reading the silence in the room. I looked at him, the man who'd fixed this home board by board, who'd helped mend the loneliness, not with promises, but with presence. Everything's where it should be, I said. He smiled, nodded, and went back to the kitchen. And I returned to the window, sat down in the chair Adam had vacated, and watched the light fade into something soft and quiet. The confrontation had come, and passed, and left behind a peace I hadn't known in years. The house was quieter after Adam left. Not the usual kind of quiet, the good kind, where the wind moves through the trees and the floorboards creak with memory, but a hollow kind, like something had been scraped out of the walls. Even Marco noticed it. He didn't ask about the argument, but he moved a little softer around me the next few days, checked the back steps for loose boards, made extra soup, fixed the rattling fan in the upstairs hall without being told. That's the kind of man he was. Never forced his presence, just adjusted it to match the shape of the room. The documents sat in their folder on my writing desk undisturbed. I didn't touch them, didn't need to. The choice had already been made, ink dried, signatures witnessed. Adam had left with them tucked under one arm like a burden he hadn't expected to carry. I wondered if he'd read the letter I'd attached, the one in my own handwriting, where I told him I loved him but wouldn't entrust him with the one thing he couldn't seem to understand, care that didn't ask for anything back. The first few days he didn't call. Then the email came. Brief, formal. Dad, I hope you'll reconsider. I've spoken with another attorney. We believe there may be grounds to challenge the change on the basis of undue influence. If Marco coerced you, even subtly, that would constitute legal overreach. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. Adam, no, love Adam, no, how are you? No mention of the years. Just a warning, wrapped in legalese, like everything he said these days. I didn't respond. Instead, I went out to the garden that afternoon with my cane and sat under the oak tree, the one that had shaded Ruth's chair for 30 summers. I brought a book, but didn't open it. Just sat there watching the breeze shuffle the leaves, listening to the world keep turning without needing permission. Marco came around the corner later with a wheelbarrow full of trimmings, paused when he saw me like he didn't want to interrupt. "Do you want me to sit?" he asked. "If you're not in a rush." He parked the barrow and lowered himself onto the bench beside me, wiping his hands on a rag. "He'll come after it," I said after a while. "Legally, I mean." Marco nodded slowly. Figured he might. "You worried?" He shrugged. "I don't want to take anything that wasn't meant for me. If that's what he thinks, maybe he's right to fight." I looked at him, studied the lines around his eyes, the sun-darkened skin, the calluses that told a life of honest work. "You didn't take anything," I said. "I gave it." He turned toward the oak tree, squinting up through the branches. "You ever think," he said quietly, "that what we leave behind is less about what we owned and more about what we were willing to let go of?" I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The next week, a letter came, from Adam's attorney this time. Clean white paper, gold foil letterhead, language polished and clinical. "Our client is preparing to contest the most recent iteration of Leonard Wexley's will on the basis of cognitive impairment and possible manipulation by a party in close proximity to the testator." I folded the letter in half, didn't finish it, placed it in the drawer with the others and went to pour myself a drink. That night I found Marco at the kitchen table, going through a catalogue of spring seedlings. He looked up when I entered and I handed him a glass of rye. He blinked. "What's this for?" "Because you're going to need patience," I said. "They've decided to drag this out." He looked down at the drink, then back up. "You sure you want to fight this?" "No," I said. "I'm tired, but some things are worth standing for, even if you have to do it sitting down." The weeks passed in a rhythm of blooming and waiting. Lawyers called, papers were exchanged. Mrs. Thompson, God bless her, stood firm, her voice sharper than any of theirs. Marco was asked to answer questions. He did, plainly and honestly. I never asked for anything, he told them. He just offered. A court-appointed physician came to evaluate me, poked at my memory, asked me to draw a clock, recite lists backward back, name the last 4 presidents. "How do you feel today, Mr. Wexley?" she asked before leaving. "Like a man who knows the value of things," I said. "Not their price." She smiled. After that, things began to settle. Adam stopped calling, the letters stopped coming. Maybe he realized the case was unwinnable. Maybe the lawyer told him it wasn't worth the fees. Or maybe, and this is what I choose to believe, maybe he read that letter after all. In it I'd written, "I didn't give this place to Marco because he asked. I gave it to him because he stayed. Because when I lost your mother, he sat in silence with me instead of changing the subject. Because when I fell, he lifted me without making me feel like a burden. Because he brought me bread and coffee and quiet. And because every time he looked at this house, he saw us. You saw an asset. He saw a home. If that makes me a fool, then let history say I died foolish, but peaceful. I still love you. But love, like land, has to be tended. And son, you let it go fallow. I never heard back, but I didn't need to. Marco and I spent the rest of that spring replanting the herb garden. He dug the holes and I placed the starts. Thyme, sage, lavender, chives, just like Ruth had. The garden bloomed, and in its blooming I found that the aftermath wasn't ruin. It was renewal. The early summer mornings came in quietly, just the way I liked them. Soft light slipping through the kitchen window, the kettle hissing gently on the stove, and the scent of dew-heavy grass drifting in through the screen door. The house no longer felt like it was waiting for something to happen. It simply was, alive in its stillness, full in its silence. The storm had passed. In the weeks since Adam's last letter, not a word had come from him. No calls, no visits, no new claims. Maybe the lawyers had finally convinced him that the case was dead in the water. Maybe he simply ran out of ways to argue with a man who wasn't willing to bend anymore. Or maybe he knew he'd already lost me long before he lost the will. The peace that followed wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't arrive like a choir or a sunrise. It was smaller than that. It was in the way I started sleeping through the night again. In the way the old grandfather clock, long broken, suddenly decided to chime. In the sound of Marco's boots on the porch steps each morning, and the way he now knocked once before entering. Not because he needed permission, but because he respected the ritual of it. He had taken to sitting with me in the evenings after his work was done. We'd talk sometimes about the vegetables or the old fence he planned to reinforce before fall, but mostly we sat in companionable silence. The kind of silence men can only share when they have nothing left to prove. One night he brought a tin box with him, battered at the corners, the label faded to near white. "Thought you might want to see these," he said, placing it on the table between us. I opened the lid. Inside were dozens of old photos, some I'd forgotten existed. Ruth on the beach with her hair up in a scarf, smiling at the sea. Adam as a toddler, holding a plastic shovel and pointing toward the camera like he'd just made a discovery. Even a photo of me and Marco from a few summers back, standing by the compost pile, both of us squinting into the sun. "Found them in the crawl space when I fixed that leaking pipe," Marco said. "Meant to give them to you sooner." I looked through them one by one, fingers brushing edges soft from time. They didn't make me sad the way they used to. They made me feel full. "Thank you," I said. He nodded. "Thought they belonged here, with you." After he left that night, I stayed up sorting through the photos, placing them into a new album Ruth had never gotten to use. I labeled them in neat, trembling handwriting, dates, names, places, a legacy not measured in money but in memory. The house changed in other ways, too. We had the roof finally redone. Marco overseeing every shingle. He painted the porch swing, repaired the sagging gate, cleared the attic of things that needed to go and saved the things that didn't. We opened up the sunroom again, letting the air circulate through curtains Ruth once stitched by hand. Even the garden began to hum louder. Birds nested in the eaves, bees worked the lavender. Everything seemed to say in its own quiet way, "This place matters again." I started writing again. Nothing formal, just reflections, bits of stories, letters to Ruth I knew she'd never read. Sometimes I left one folded on her old rocking chair. It made me feel like we were still having our conversations, in the soft language that only long-married people know how to speak. One letter read, "You always said peace wasn't a place, but a person. I think you were wrong. It's not a person. It's what remains when the right person has touched a place. And maybe that's what you left behind. Maybe it's what Marco brought back." The day we spread wildflower seed across the old vegetable patch, Marco turned to me with his hands deep in the dirt and said, "This will be your spring next year." I didn't ask if he meant mine in the literal sense. We both knew time wasn't guaranteed. But that wasn't the point anymore. There was a peace now in knowing that something would bloom long after I stopped walking this path, that the bees would return, that the wind would still know its way through the trees, that someone would be here, really here, to tend to it all. One afternoon, a letter arrived, not from a lawyer, not from Adam, just a simple envelope with a return address I didn't recognize. Inside, a card, blank inside except for Adam's handwriting, small and restrained. "I don't understand, but I'm starting to accept. I hope you're well." No apology, no anger, just a breath. I set it on the mantel beside Ruth's photo, didn't respond, didn't tear it up. Just let it be part of the room. And on we went. By late July, the hydrangeas had bloomed larger than I'd ever seen. Marco said it was the soil, said peace must be good fertilizer. We both laughed at that, and then fell into a long, grateful silence. I watched the bay from the porch that evening, mug of chamomile in hand, the air cool with approaching dusk, the sky was bruised lavender, the clouds slow and golden at the edges. "What are you thinking about?" Marco asked, settling beside me with his own cup. "Ruth," I said, "the garden, next spring, and how strange it is that you can feel more alive after letting go of everything you thought you had to protect." "That's not strange," he said. "That's just truth." I nodded. A new peace had settled here. Not a reward, not a victory. Just a gentle, persistent knowing that what had been built in love could remain in love. Not through blood, not through name, but through the daily acts of care, loyalty, and presence. And in the end, maybe that's what legacy really is. Not the things we leave to someone, but the life we leave with them.